Laura Ingraham Show.
We're looking at some of the things that have happened. Remember we were standing there, Drew? That was fake. Hillary didn't come out because she was in an absolute freak out. That's why she didn't come out. I mean, rumors were she was chucking stuff across the room, and if you're in a room with Hillary Clinton and there is any standing lamp in the room, look out, because that thing could go flying. But she didn't want to show up in front of the cameras because she didn't want to have to face the truth in her moment of truth. And so all these weeks later, Hillary's big lesson of the election is that she lost because of something called fake news. And just so you understand, when they say fake news, what the left is talking about are stories that they refuse to cover, that were covered by other news outlets and framed in a way the American people can both grasp, understand, and themselves unpack. So fake news is actually the real news, and the real news is the fake news.
This isn't about politics or partisanship. Lives are at risk.
Oh, man. They're going for the Comet Pizzas thing? Their lives are at risk? How about brain cells are at risk? If people even listen to this any longer? This is the typical liberal refusal to admit their policies fail every time. They don't work. Their candidate was a terrible candidate. She was not likable. She was not believable. When she tried to do her sit down and remember the listening tour she did when she would just nod her head? It was all so phony. So what's fake? The fake is the real news. The fake news, the fake is the real news. The real news is the fake news. That's a lot of Americans think. You know, there's some journalists out there I think who do great jobs, and they work hard. But I think more people today see what they believed was classic unbiased journalism as advocacy journalism. That's what has happened over the years. And this is nothing new. I mean, look, I worked for Reagan. We all knew this back in 1987 in the Reagan administration. And before that, the media, they were all against Reagan, and they were against Reagan in the 70s. They were against in Goldwater in the 60s. They were against Reagan in the 80s. This is just the way it was. They just didn't have cable news or talk radio back then, or the internet. So all these other avenues for people to get information and analysis and sure opinions, those avenues are now available to the American people. And what the kingmakers in the media want, they want to go back to the old days, when they're the only ones who had any input, when it was, that's the way it is, Walter Cronkite. You know what? That's the way he wanted you to think it was. My parents always used to say that. I was a little kid. It was in the mid-'70s. I remember sitting down and watching Walter Cronkite at night. All my parents would always throw stuff at the TV. I mean, this is where I got this from. My mother, all 5 foot tall of her, she was like, liberal Walter Cronkite. You should have heard my mother. By the way, I saw Cardinal this morning in an unlikely place when I was driving my kids to school. And my mother always said, when you see a cardinal, that would be me. We were just talking about my mother. My sons and I were just talking about my mom. So she was giving me a wink from heaven this morning. And she would say, no, that's the way you want it to be. That's the way it is. Oh, according to you, Walter. Well, you can't criticize Walter Cronkite. He was the king of journalism, of objective journalism. Well, a lot of people thought he actually wasn't. A lot of people thought that he had an amazing voice. He clearly had talent, but that he was a big Democrat. And later on in life, we learned definitively that he was a big Democrat. Dan Rather, another unbiased journalist who took over for Walter Cronkite. Tom Brokaw, another. I like Tom a lot. Like the stuff he did on The Greatest Generation. Tom is a Democrat. I mean, he certainly sounds like it, going after Fox News, going after talk radio, while I have him on to promote the book. I'm like, Tom, you're killing me here. I'm promoting your book, and 3 weeks ago you were going after talk radio. Which is it? All these people. But they want to say, if you're not part of that old cabal, the old dinosaurs of the media, if you're not part of that group, or you're not part of the Daily Beast Salon, Media Matters, if you're not part of that cool in crowd, then you're part of fake news. All the rest of it's fake. Fake. It's like alt-right. alt-right fake alt-right. This is what their argument is. Koch brothers, alt-right, fake, anti-immigrant, a xenophobic, protectionist, anti-women. That's their whole argument. But you can do a thought bubble. You know those word clouds? Word cloud. I hate those word clouds. Don't you hate those? So stupid. Here's our word cloud. But their word cloud would include all of that. So you're sexist, racist, xenophobic. Islamophobic. Thank you very much. Fake news, alt-right, protectionist. All the isms that George W. Bush talked about, all those isms. And they wonder why they're losing. Because they don't like the very people that they need to vote for them.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
That's actually funny. It almost sounds like she's being sarcastic when she's saying it. So this is Christmas time, so we have a hymnal that includes Silent Night and Joy to the World. That's her hymnal. That's what Hillary's hymnal. We should set that to music.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Almost sounded like she was just trying to come up with a few more at the end.
Yeah, she was like,
what else are they again?
Yeah, what are those icks or isms or ists? Misogynist. I think she forgot misogynist. Right? Part of the patriarchy. Oh, no. It's a shocker that she didn't win. You wanted to hear that for 4 years? I don't think so. So, fake news. What do you consider fake news today? Give me your top 3 purveyors of fake news. 855-40-LAURA. Speaking of fake, the queen of fake should know something about fake. Because why? Why should the queen of fake know something about fake? It's not like there was anything in her past that she faked.
I remember landing under sniper fire. There was supposed to be some kind of a greeting ceremony at the airport, but instead we just ran with our heads down to get into the vehicles to get to our base.
Oh, she had the Brian Williams virus on that. It's not like she offered a fake justification for the attacks in Benghazi.
Protesters breached the walls. They tore down the American flag. And it was of grave concern to us because the inflammatory video had been shown on Egyptian television, which has a broader reach than just inside Egypt.
So that wasn't fake, even though she had emailed her daughter about the fact that this was a terror attack. That started by some video. It's a terror attack, but they didn't like that news. In 2012, in the fall of 2012, that would have been a horror show for Barack Obama up against Romney for re-election. Remember, there was a moment where it looked like Romney maybe would have a chance against Obama. Who knows how that could have affected it? So they had to fake the news back then. They had to fake it. It was a video. Go after the guy with a video. Put out pro-Muslim PSAs in Egypt and Iraq and spend $20,000 making stupid commercials saying that video doesn't represent the American people. But Breitbart and other news outlets are fake? The queen of fake. Oh, no, that Russian reset, that wasn't faked, was it? No, she and Sergei Lavrov had such a great relationship from the beginning.
We worked hard to get the right Russian word. Do you think we got it?
You get this wrong.
I got it wrong.
Wait a second. Is hands up, don't shoot fake news? Was that fake? I think. How about airbrushing people out of photos and into photos, as they did also with some of those crowd shots during the campaign? Was that fake? How about saying that if you like your plan, you can keep your plan when you knew those plans were going to go away? Was that fake? They have a nerve to talk about fake. And Nancy Pelosi, by the way, if Nancy Pelosi goes on and on about fake news, fake face, fake face, fake news. I mean, you shoot yourself up with that much Botox, you're talking about fake anything, I think you're on a slippery slope. Thin ice, as my mother used to say. 855-40-LAURA. Fake. What's fake and what's real today? Fake news. Give me your top 3 fake news outlets. 855-40-LAURA. We'll take a break. A lot more to get to on your healthy radio addiction. Coming up, Mike Huckabee is going to join us. Also, a political scientist, environmental science professor, What is the life of a climate skeptic like? We'll talk about that. And the death of an American hero, John Glenn, at age 95. One of the last of the great American heroes passes away. What an amazing life. And when we come back, Brian News, fake news man, calls out fake news. Are now bemoaning, quote, fake news. This is all being led by the left. Media Matters, the Soros people, they have to keep the engine going on the left. They have to keep the radicals happy because the progressives are in revolt. The real truth is that they want heads. They want someone's head after this election. And so they have to quickly put out, okay, let's use a fake news thing. Quickly, get that out there. Otherwise, they're going to blame us, the consultants, the ad people, picking a bad candidate. Yeah, they're gonna remember that we trashed Bernie Sanders and those emails. Talk about fake news. Talk about alt-right. Get that out there. Who are the worst offenders in the fake news department? Let's go to Deanne in Missouri. Line 1. Deanne has a funny take on this. Deanne, welcome.
Yes. Hey, I just wanted to make a comment about the fake news. And you're absolutely correct. It's lies and rumors, and it's been going on since the beginning of time. It's not going to end because people are people.
Yeah, and I think it's in the eye of the beholder in some of these stories. Some of the stories have framing around them. They are more analysis than stories. Well, that's fine, as long as people know that. But don't try to pass off objective reporting. Something is objective when it's really not. Because bias is found in the stories not only that you cover, but the stories you refuse to cover, that you refuse to really cover adequately or in depth. Later on, we're going to get into this story about how the housing market is going to be hurt if we start deporting people, the housing market. You know why? Because they want these cheap laborers who come in 2 months later, they're working on a job site. That's why, because these are jobs that Americans did. You could support a family as a home builder and as a really top craftsman in the home building business. You know why I know that? Because many of my friends in New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, that's how they supported their families, and they did fine, did well. The jobs are gone. They're all given to immigrant workers for the most part. You drive around Washington, D.C., you try to find a white guy or a black guy on a job site, on a construction site. Good luck. On a house. I'm talking residential. Mostly commercial, too, is mostly Hispanic. Why do you think that is? Because they're going to have cheaper labor prices. But see, so there's the bias there. They'll cover, it's going to hurt. Well, yes, it will hurt the builders who don't want to pay higher wages for their workers. Yeah, I guess it'll hurt them, but it'll help a whole bunch of other people. See, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Let's go to Amanda in Oklahoma, line 2. Amanda. Amanda's going across the pond for her fake news.
Yeah, the Denver Guardian's definitely fake news.
I can't hear you, baby, but you said Denver Guardian. I don't even know what the Denver Guardian is. I thought you meant the British Guardian, the Brit paper. I appreciate it. Let's go to Bobby, Florida, very quickly, line 3. Bob.
Hi, Laura. Got a question for you. Why are we supposed to believe the media now when it tells us that Hillary won the popular vote by, I think the last number was like 2 million? They're either going to lie, skew the news, it's going to be biased. I don't believe anything the media says other than if it's, and I don't want to sound like I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid, but I mean, generally, the more conservative shows like yours and some of the others, I think are putting the news out there about as, straightforward as it can be. But I don't believe them when they tell me she won the popular vote. I don't believe that at all. Why should I?
Yep. A real cynic out there. Well, I'll tell you this, Bob. It is interesting that in many talk radio formats, in a conservative format, we have been tougher on Republicans than even the mainstream media has been. Like we're pretty much equal opportunity critics on the Republican side. I mean, who's been tougher on Paul Ryan and the gang than I have been? Not many. But we're also tough on Hillary. We're also if the president-elect, if he continues down this road where it looks like, the main issues of immigration trade aren't being addressed, then of course we're going to be there to be a lively check on that. But so what's more real and what's more fake? Again, it's in the eye of the beholder, is it not? 855-40-LAURA. We'll get your calls. Huckabee up next. Governor Mike Huckabee, who's far more charitable in his discernment regarding Harry Reid than I am. Hi, Governor Huckabee. How are you?
I'm not too sure about that, Laura. I was just thinking, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you.
Woo! Oh, no, that was...
I mean, bye-bye, Harry. You know, it's hard not to try to be polite and say, look, I wish you well in retirement. I just wish your retirement had come 20 years earlier. This is a guy who was one of the most obstinate obstacles in the U.S. Senate, one of the most partisan people, and frankly, one of the people that contributed as much to an absolutely disastrous climate of incivility. I remember when he went on the floor of the Senate and just out of thin air made up this whole thing about Romney's tax returns. You know, I mean, those are the kind of things that are just amazing. But, you know, let's be charitable. He's gone, and the country is better for it.
What do you think about the focus now on this self-generated theme of fake news that the left is now putting out there, that was grabbed by Hillary Clinton yesterday when she spoke on behalf of Reid, and in the tribute to Reid yesterday, she called out fake news as well. What are they really getting at? What is this really about?
Well, I think they're trying to acknowledge that so much fake news has had an influence on our culture, like that Benghazi was the result of a video, or fake news that Donald Trump couldn't win the election, or fake news that, you know, Donald Trump had all these issues that with women who apparently then never came forward after they did just before the election. I mean, you could go on and on, Laura, but I guess I was most appalled that Hillary Clinton was saying, we've got to do something about this. And I'm thinking, well, what is she suggesting? Is that the government now censor people's expressions? There are a lot of things that get published on the Internet about me that are totally phony, false, absolutely libelous, and if I were not a person in the public eye, I would be able to sue, but I probably couldn't because I'm a public figure, just like you. And yet, you know, the fact is, I don't want the government censoring free speech. That's a dangerous thing. I mean, thinking, what are they asking for? What are they asking for?
Well, I think fake news are the stories that their media outlets wouldn't cover, didn't frame right, and didn't capture the imagination or the spirit of the American people. So I think they feel better if they call it fake, because it means that they can avoid taking responsibility for failed policies that always end up losing. In the end, they don't work, yet they can't acknowledge that, so they have to blame it on Fox or talk radio or fake news or the alt-right. It's all part of the same denial game that they've been in, you know, really since they were in college. And a lot of these people, I said this last night on Fox, Governor Huckabee, someone like an Obama, despite his position as president of the United States, it's like he never evolved beyond the college campus setting. He's still back in that community activist, college radical mindset, and he never really changed.
I think that's a very good assessment, Laura, and it also is very evident that if you look at who Obama surrounded himself with in the White House, it was largely academicians and think tank type people who really had very little experience in the real world of accomplishing things. And that meant with him, because he didn't have any real world experience of accomplishing things. When you look at Donald Trump's picks for cabinet and the people he's surrounding himself with, these are people who are extraordinarily successful. These are people who have done things, who have been in the trench. So when I see a new labor secretary, or I see the Treasury secretary, or whoever it may be that he's picking, what I'm seeing are people that understand what it's like to live, work, succeed, and fail in the real world, and that's refreshing to see.
The one person that is concerning to some conservatives is this Pudzer, who's up for labor. And the reason that some conservatives are concerned about Andy Pudzer is because of what they believe are his views for mass increase in immigration and support for foreign workers, that Carl's Jr. and Hardee's are restaurants that depend on cheap foreign labor, and that he will not be in sync with Donald Trump on those issues. Do you have concern about that?
Not so much, because I do think that Pudzer is a team player. He's going to come and understand that he works for the president, not the other way around. And his job is not to run the immigration service. So I don't think that that's a cause for great alarm. I think the greater cause for celebration is that here's a guy who understands that when you arbitrarily raise the minimum wage to some level that is not sustainable in most markets, it's a job killer. And I think that's going to be refreshing. The fact that the left is going nuts about his appointment, that they hate it so much, is probably the best sign that we can have that it's an excellent appointment. I like Puzder because he's a very plain-spoken guy. Mm-hmm. He tells it like it is. He's smart. He took a company that was on its way to annihilation, and he took it to success and brought it back, revived it, rebuilt it, made it the most successful it's ever been. He's employed thousands and thousands of people. To me, those are the kind of qualities that you want in the labor secretary.
Well, I certainly hope that he's in sync with Obama on those issues because, yeah, he's had a fascinating career in business, and I like the politically incorrect stuff too. I don't want someone in the labor field pushing for a mass increase in foreign workers, which will just keep wages down in the United States. That's the concern I have. But this was Nancy Pelosi. Yesterday, she was going off on the EPA choice. Let's listen.
With control of EPA, Pruitt could do immense damage to the air our children breathe and the water they drink. By the way, what Pruitt stands for is exactly the same thing, the same agenda that the Republicans in the House of Representatives espouse almost every day that we are here. So this isn't different from the Republicans in Congress.
What is your take on the EPA choice? They're freaking out about that.
I think Nancy Pelosi's drinking something stronger than dirty water. I mean, I really do. There's something wrong with that woman when she takes on Scott Pruitt and the House Republicans as if they want filthy air, dirty water, that they're really against children and elderly people. That's just nonsense. Scott Pruitt I've known for a long time. He was my Oklahoma chairman when I ran for president in 2008. He's been a good friend of mine. I've known him, in many capacities and campaigned for him when he first ran for Attorney General of Oklahoma. He's a great choice. And one of the reasons that I think the left will go crazy is not because he's some kind of person who wants to pollute the environment, but because he's a person who understands that the EPA doesn't have the constitutional authority to just make up law. That's what we elect the Congress for. And the EPA is out of control. I think he will go and not just oil the machinery and babysit the bureaucracy. He will go and blow the place up, and that's what needs to happen.
Governor Huckabee, can you talk to us about Christmas and what your family does and maybe help people who are listening? Maybe they're by themselves or a lot of people are sad at Christmas because they miss family members who are no longer here with them. And to keep the spirit and the joy of Christmas at the forefront without all the stress and the frenzy. We've been asking all of our guests for these kinds of reflections.
Laura, I appreciate that question because there are more suicides at Christmas than any other time of the year. And for most of us, it's a time of great joy, but for many people, it is a time of extraordinary stress and a time of loneliness. This is why I think that if there's ever a time in a person's life where they need to be a part of the fellowship of a church, attend a service, be with people, this is not a time to sit alone. It's so important. If you are not near family, when you are, of course, that's the ideal, but when you're not, be a part of a fellowship of believers where that you can understand that Christmas is the one time on the calendar when it's a reminder that we don't have to go looking for God. He comes looking for us. That's the whole story of Christmas, is that in a world that was bereft with any sense of spirituality, God showed up in Bethlehem. He came to us. And it's not that we have to go digging around and looking and seeing if we can find him. If we will be still and know him, he will be there with us and show up. And that's what Christmas is the great reminder of.
Well, and I think it is easy to get caught up in the frenzy and everyone's rushing around and gifts. And we talked about this yesterday, Governor Huckabee, but when you look back on your childhood as Christmas, it's almost never a gift. It's almost never that it's the memory that you really hold dear. It's the time that people spent together and the simple things that you did together, making cookies or visiting someone, or what your grandmother's house was like, but it's never usually about the gift. It's about the people and going to church or going to mass and the songs, the music of Christmas, and most of that doesn't cost a lot.
It doesn't cost a thing. I wrote a book a few years ago called A Simple Christmas, and that's exactly the theme of it, is that when we look back in the greatest moments of our lives at Christmas, it isn't the quantity of gifts or how much they cost. It's the quality of the life that we see in our friends and our families, and it's the simple things. And the whole story of Christmas is, in fact, a simple story. It's not a story of a lot of celebrations and fireworks. It's a very humble story of God going to the lowliest place that could be imagined and identifying in the most really humiliating way to be given birth in a feeding trough for hogs and cows and sheep. And if you think about it, nothing could be more disgusting and degrading. So no matter how low a person may think he or she is, they just need to remember that when God chose to show up in the world, he picked a place that nobody else would have gone and said, this is where I'm going to get my start here on this earth.
And I think Christians, right? And I think Christians feel like many times they're under assault in the secular society, increasingly secular and pornified society in which we live. But I think I heard this last night at the Feast of the Immaculate Conception Mass I was at in St. Mary's, and the priest reminded us of that. This is actually not your permanent home. This is you're passing through, and Christ was very unwelcome. He was very unwelcome, and he had a very difficult time of it. So don't expect that life's going to be a bowl of cherries.
It definitely won't be, and that's it's a great message. I love this time of year, and it's wonderful to not only reconnect with dear friends, but also to spend, of course, the time with family, and for me now, grandkids, which is the greatest of all, and see that there is hope, because when you see grandkids, you kind of have this sense that God isn't finished with the planet. He's still letting people show up to take over.
That's a great thought. I love that. Governor Huckabee, you're the best. We love having you on. You have a very Merry Christmas with your family, and we just appreciate you so much. Thank you so much. Stay with us. Don't go away. So Harry Reid, his legacy. How would you describe his legacy in one word? What is his legacy? Do you remember some of the outrages of Harry Reid? We really should have played the greatest hits. Harry Reid going after the Koch brothers on the Senate floor. Harry Reid lying about Mitt Romney on the Senate floor. Harry Reid mumbling and stumbling his way through any number of addresses on things like immigration or spending or Obamacare.
If a person coming before this body wanted to be a cabinet officer, he couldn't be if he did the same refusal Mitt Romney does about tax returns. So the word's out that he hasn't paid any taxes for 10 years.
That's the tribute. Oh, Harry Reid leaves Washington not a moment too soon. The Democrats have, they've moved into full, they're actually crying now. Were they crying like yesterday? Wasn't Chuck Schumer weeping? He was weeping on the Senate floor. Yeah, he started crying at one point about Harry Reid.
In my life, he is one of the men of greatest character that I have ever met. Powerful, but with uncommon humility. Honest and loyal. Unsparingly funny. A scrappy fighter with this great big heart.
Oh my God. I'm half expecting Harry Reid to run for president in 4 years. I mean, Biden's talking about he's going to run for president. We'll get into Biden. Biden's comments yesterday about these people. We'll talk about that. Who are these people that we have to do a better job of relating to? These people. And he kind of threw Hillary under the bus a little bit. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I have to get to this sob story. There's a sob story in the New York Times. Well, it's another immigration sob story. Why more deportations would be a blow for the housing market. We've already seen pieces like this referring to the workers, the construction workers, especially in residential housing, overwhelmingly Hispanic and in most parts of the United States now, overwhelmingly Hispanic. So we've already seen those pieces. Oh, what are we going to do we're not going to have any workers, as if people never did construction before. How many of you ever worked construction? How many of you worked on a construction site or a road crew and mostly it's men. It's intensive. It's heavy lifting and it's a lot of upper body strength, but women have done it too, but mostly it's been men. And they were American citizens, and these were jobs that paid pretty good wages, and you could support a family on this job. And now what happens is, and a friend of mine told me about this in New England, a house he was rebuilding and renovating, rebuilding, fixing. And he hired a company that has mostly 50 to 55-year-old American citizens up in Massachusetts, mostly white guys, I guess. And he started asking them questions about why are some of these other companies hiring mostly immigrant workers? It's mostly Spanish spoken at residential work sites. And he said because they pay them nothing and make more money. They pay them low wages. We're a dying breed, he said. There aren't many men like us left in construction. This is in Massachusetts. He said you can't support a family on this. If you're a young guy coming up and you want to be in construction, you really can't support a family on it because the wages have been driven down by this mass influx of illegal immigrants. And he said, so that's why. But our company, we hire American citizens only. We don't cut corners. And guess what? The jobs are done really well. These guys are craftsmen. They don't just slap it up, throw it up, and hope nobody sees the fact that the joints don't meet perfectly, or the trim is hanging off in the back. And I'm not saying all these folks do bad work, but when you can't communicate in the English language, there is oftentimes problems in translation with how a job should be done, following the plans, but it's cheaper. Right? So we've seen those articles. Oh, who's going to build these houses? Who's going to do it? Now, this one takes the cake. This article is basically saying that because so many illegal immigrants, of course they call them undocumented citizens or immigrants, many undocumented immigrants, the New York Times writes today, Emily Badger, contribute income to households with legal residents. And they were talking about 42 particular counties that they studied in the United States. And they said in these 42 counties, for example, the researchers estimate that nearly 3/4 of the 1.2 million households with at least one undocumented adult immigrant also contained a documented adult household member. And about 1/3 of all undocumented immigrants in those counties lived in owner-occupied homes. It's just so much higher than what people think. It's a very interesting twist on the Latino incorporation story, writes this researcher, Mr. Rue. There are tremendous increases in home ownership and other things. A lot of those gains are because they pooled resources across legal status.
I've seen the dreamers come to me and explain to me, we're Americans. We know no other country.
Oh, no. And deportation, this Jacob Rue, obviously a liberal researcher, he said can have an effect similar to other life traumas, such as divorce, death of a family member, and unemployment. Well, yeah, that's why you don't come here illegally, because when you're sent home, that's a trauma. And it hurts the other people in the household. Right. That's why you do this thing called follow the law. But can you imagine? This is like saying, well, it's really inconvenient when someone robs a bank because that money that he got from robbing the bank is no longer part of the household income. And so the people in that household suffer as a result of him being sent to jail. And that the money that they took from the bank was seized by the government. That's a trauma to this household. Yeah, it's a trauma. It's a trauma to American workers. The construction worker who used to make a decent wage could support his family who no longer can. So when we talk about fake news, this is what I'm talking about. Fake is in the eye of the beholder because there's a sliver of this that is true. Of course, if someone's undocumented, they contribute income to a family that includes documented people, that person's deported. They're going to have less income. Yes, that's true. It's also true that the fact that the undocumented immigrant is living in the United States has an effect on people who are legally in the country, either in public schools, maybe they're trying to get the same job that this individual has, maybe if the person is involved in some other type of criminal activity, it can obviously have traumatic effects on other Americans. But the New York Times only focuses on the trauma as experienced by the illegal immigrant. Now do you understand what I'm talking about when I talk about fake news? This is fake. Because it always comes at it from the perspective of how is it going to hurt the illegal immigrant. Almost never will the New York Times focus on how this mass immigration, both legal and illegal, has changed America and has made people believe less in the American dream. I tweeted this out yesterday. Drew, find it for me. The fact that more young adults feel like the American dream is unavailable to them, that they will not make, and they do not make as much money as their parents. Yeah, the American dream is collapsing for young adults, study says, as odds plunge that children will earn more than their parents. So what about that trauma? What about that trauma? Are we going to talk about that and really talk about it? Or is that politically incorrect? So political correctness makes traditional news gathering more fake. So it's fine to talk about how this affects Latino families. That's fine. I have no problem with talking about that, as long as you really highlight the massive trauma to America for open borders that open borders have caused. Do you understand what I'm saying? 855-40-LAURA. Let's go to Manya in New Jersey on line 2. We're talking about contractors, home builders, and the fact that this is a job that Americans used to do that it's difficult to find Americans doing any longer. Manya.
Hi, Laura.
Hey.
I just wanted to add to your point. There are states, such as New Jersey, where my husband and I live, that actually help the environment for the immigrants and illegal immigrants. My husband's been a contractor for about 27 years, and you just go online, pay $100, get a license, and that's it. And you go out. These men, illegals, immigrants, whichever way you want to call them, they don't speak English.
No.
They do work in people's homes. My husband goes to the jobs after they've been ruined, and he says, now you're going to pay triple the price because you hired illegals that don't know what they're doing. They don't speak English.
Well,
so
right.
The states do
help. And you know what? You know what's amazing about this? Is that there's not even an attempt to speak English. Do you notice it used to be it was not a badge of honor not to speak the English language in public. Now people are just totally brazen about it. They're not going to speak English. You're going to learn to speak Spanish. And by the way, I speak Spanish and I love the Spanish language. And I want to get my Spanish perfecto, sin accent. But when you're working in the United States, you should have a working understanding of English. And they don't even bother. I was visiting a friend of mine's, he's building a new place way out in Virginia. This must have been now 2 or 3 months ago. So we're out there in like a Friday afternoon. He said, I want to show, because the kitchen I was looking at for my kitchen, I was trying to figure out my kitchen at the time. And I go out there and I said, oh, do you know these people working on the job site? You ever go out, walk the site and talk? I have no idea who they are. I said, well, does that concern you that, people don't speak English? How do you know they're really qualified to be doing this work? Well, you trust this contractor? Most Americans who are building or renovating, they just don't care. They just don't care. That's a problem with state licensing. Don't tell me there's no way to check whether someone's illegally in the United States. Don't even tell me that. That's ridiculous. We can put a man on the moon, and we can't. We have that Mars rover going around Mars right now, watching him on the computer every day, that little Mars rover, but we can't check a worker's status in the United States. Who believes that? I don't believe that. I appreciate the call. Let's go to Stanley in Iowa, line 3. Stanley.
Hey, Laura.
Stanley,
I'm
speak
50
up, my
years
friend. I can't hear any of our callers today. Go ahead.
Yes, can you
Much
hear me
better.
now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm 50 years old, and when I grew up, you never heard of there's jobs Americans wouldn't do. We pay people not to work. There's people that don't compete for work because they sit around and just collect a check.
Well, I think there's some of that for sure, but I also think that when you incentivize non-working, and then the jobs that they are qualified to do, because maybe these folks didn't go to college, are overwhelmingly given to other people. You know, I talked about that Washington Gas guy I spoke with, and I always make a point to speak to the folks working outside in the cold or the heat. And I said, why is everyone speaking Spanish on this job? He just says, don't ask me. He said, it ain't right. I said, no, it ain't right. And he said, this must be a pretty good paying job. He said, yep, a lot of my friends would like this job. I said, and he knew what I was talking about. It's ridiculous. I mean, do you go down to Mexico and see Americans working on job sites down there? Speaking English on their job sites? I don't think so. It's only a one-way street. Let's go to JC in Florida on line 4. JC, welcome. We're going to take a break after this. Go ahead.
Hey, Laura. Hey, it's a pleasure here. I just want to make a point here that everything that you're saying is absolutely true in all the colors that could have made there. So I work in the construction field for many years for a company, okay? And they let us go. I'm a Hispanic, but I was born in this country. My parents come here the legal way and everything. They have let go all of us, from the African Americans to the Hispanic Americans to the white Americans, to replace us by these illegal aliens that are taking over our jobs. And you know what? When they say Americans don't do anything, you've got to be kidding me.
Oh, please.
Us as Americans, we going out. We work. We're hard workers. What do you think we're the best country in the world? Because we're hard workers. We're intelligent. We're smart. We go-getters. So they can't tell me, oh, no, Americans don't want to do this. You know what? They're full of it. And I don't want to use that word that comes after it, but, you know, they're full of it.
So when were you laid off your construction job?
4 years ago, and I had to start all over again. I'm 45 years old. I have a kid, you know, and it's been hard, but it's not impossible, because if you work hard, you get somewhere. And that's what I keep telling everybody that got laid off, because we still stay in contact. You got illegal aliens. Let me tell you the story, okay? So people are aware of this. First of all, just like Mr. Trump says that I voted for him, and I'm a registered Democrat. I voted for Mr. Trump because I know he will make a difference for our country. These people that come here, they definitely don't like us, because I'm into sports, so I play soccer with many, many people from all over the world, and I hear what they say, and they think I'm racist because I tell them the truth about how America used to be.
Hold on. We're going to finish with you. We'll take a break. We're running way over this segment, but hold on. We'll get to more of this with JC coming up. We're going to get to him in just one moment. Bob in California, though, says he's been a contractor for over 25 years in California, but you're saying you can't find American white construction workers?
Yes. And I feel like such a hypocrite when I sit at the dinner table and I discuss work and issues, because I'm a stout conservative. But here I heard the gentleman from Florida, and I feel for him, but the concrete business where I'm at is very labor intensive. I try my hardest to look for the white American, black American, and I can't find them. They won't do the hard work. They're not good at it when I hire them. I've tried hiring young 20-year-olds as laborers to start to learn the trade. They'll work for a day or two and disappear.
You ever decide to raise your wages?
Listen, I pay my concrete finishers over $200 a day. That's $1,000 a week.
For one person?
Make decent money. One person.
Well, you know what I think happened? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. You know what I think happened is that people stop looking for this work because they feel like they're not going to get it. In a lot of cases, they think the industry is dominated by Hispanic workers, And so I bet there are a lot of people are just like, I'm not going to get that job. I bet a lot of people don't even try anymore. Because you do concede, do you not, Bob, that these are jobs that Americans traditionally did do. And I'm not talking 50 years ago. I'm talking 20 years ago. I'm talking back in also the 1970s, 1980s. You didn't have this deal where everybody on every site was just speaking Spanish.
Well, that's my point. I got into this business from the bottom up. There were white people, black, not that many African Americans, but I started out working on the military bases where you earned a Davis-Bacon prevailing wage. That may have lured me in to this trade, but I cannot, and I'm not sticking up for the illegal immigrant. I'm not. But what do? Fold? I have to earn money to keep my business afloat.
Well, what we have to do, I think, is enforce our. Yeah, I think if you're Hispanic and you're here legally, great, get the job. I think it's awesome. But what I think the government has to do, it's not really the business's fault. It's really unless you're hiring illegal workers, but it's the government's policy to allow thousands of people to cross the border illegally every day of every year. That's the government policy. Government policy not to send people home. Government policy to look the other way. Government policy to have sanctuary cities. Government policy to have sanctuary schools. Government policy to have sanctuary colleges, state colleges. They allow this to happen. So we increase the number of people here. We increase the labor pool. Wages stay, fairly flat as they have. That's not my statistic. That's a Labor Department statistic. Wages have stayed flat. And meanwhile, we have all of these people who don't go to college who have nothing to do. It's a problem. Tom in Virginia, before we get to our next guest. Tom, very quickly.
As a building inspector, every day I feel like I'm in Little Mexico. You go to a job, you'll turn it down 2, 3, 4 times, and they don't get it correct. And the big builders, Ryan, H.H. Hunt, they don't care. They just keep on hiring them. They go for price. That's it.
That's it. They turn a quick buck. I've seen it. I know. You're 100% right. And yeah, I have some friends that are in the inspecting business, and you're right about that. Well, when you can't understand the language, you can't understand the direction unless your foreman's speaking Spanish, right? Then that's happening. But it's still, I think the same thing. Cutting corners to up your profit at what cost to the American worker. But the government is responsible for this mess. The government is responsible. I appreciate those calls and all that input. 855-40-LAURA. We'll keep talking about this. We have a lot of other issues to get to. We have a new EPA chief who is causing, nominee, who's causing the left to go in an absolute meltdown mode. We thought would bring in, and I'm delighted he's with us, Roger Pelkey, who's a former professor of environmental studies at UC Boulder. He's the author of a new book, The Edge, War Against Cheating and Corruption in Cutthroat World of Elite Sports. That's quite a change from climate studies, environmental studies to sports, but he has a fascinating perspective on what's happened to politicized science and projections in the environmental movement, and he joins us now. Roger, good to talk to you. How are you? Roger, you there? Is Roger there? Okay. I don't know where Roger is. We'll reconnect with Roger. I can't hear him. But, I was doing some research before I went on Special Report last night, and there are like a gaggle of scientists who have called into question what the far left climate studies fanatics are trying to do to America. And John Christie is the person I'm talking about, and he is a well-respected, the author of many peer-reviewed studies from the University of Alabama, Huntsville. And he's testified before Congress, and he basically said that no matter what the United States does to curtail fossil fuel emissions, it will make virtually no difference into the warming of the planet, how much it warms, how fast it warms. So he's the director of the Earth System Science Center at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and frequently he's described as a skeptic of the he's a skeptic in this way. He doesn't believe that the result of what is undeniably some period of warming, but we've had other periods that have been warmer and lasted longer, by the way. He doesn't believe in the dire predictions that it's going to be this climate catastrophe. And it's hard to contradict Christie. It's hard to slam Christie because he's so renowned in the field. He said our effect would be between 5 and 8/100ths of a degree. We would not even be able to measure any sea level change. It would be so tiny as to be immeasurable. By the way, sea levels have been rising for 20,000 years, so it will continue to rise no matter what anyone does about their emissions. So this is what it was at a Congressional Oversight Committee hearing at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. They released their draft guidelines for greenhouse gases last year and the effects on climate change. So his testimony at the time focused primarily on just his study of climate temperatures compared to the climate models that suggest it's all an incredibly dangerous trend that's going to, swamp cities and coastlines will disappear, et cetera. I think we now have Roger Pelkey on the line. Roger, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. So, Roger, I was just going through. I know you know Professor Christie and know his work. It is something to see the reaction to Trump's EPA selection. And there's no doubt about it that it's going to be one of the most hotly contested of all the cabinet picks because he's an Oklahoma Attorney General and he's routinely branded as a climate denialist by the New York Times. Give us your perspective on both this, this political fight we're seeing brewing and just the overall position of the science right now on this.
Yeah, the climate issue has been around for a long time, many decades, and probably over the last 10 years, really, I would say since Al Gore's movie came out, the climate issue really morphed into a left-right political issue. And we argue about it through science and we argue about technical details. But really, the science is just a veneer over, more fundamental political differences, and that are playing out at the flashpoint of the new nominee for EPA.
Well, so the disagreement among scientists isn't so much about the warming, right? It's about how catastrophic the consequences of the warming and also the effect that America's a serious cut in emissions would have on that effect. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean the science at its core isn't terribly complicated. You put some chemicals in the atmosphere, they're going to have an effect, and I think everyone agrees that there's going to be effects. But when you're making projections out 100 years into the future, there's plenty of room for people to see catastrophe there and others to look at the other end of the spectrum and say it's going to be benign. And we can't resolve that. So it becomes a risk management problem, which very quickly moves over into economics. If it was free to respond to climate change, everybody would be supporting it. And the more that it costs, the more that it brings out people's concerns.
And tell us about your own experience at UC Boulder. It seems that the intolerance on campus, going back to when I was at Dartmouth to in the 80s to today, it's much worse today than it was even when I was a conservative student journalist back in 1985. Talk about your experience.
Yeah, I have to say that being at the University of Colorado Boulder has actually been fantastic. That's probably the most supportive environment. Our Board of Regents just 2 weeks ago, after the WikiLeaks release that showed that I was being attacked for my research, they issued a statement of support for academic freedom, 9-0 across the Regent party lines. But the challenge has been, for me, it's been more the media and politicians who don't particularly like the research that I've done, which indicates that the increasing cost of disasters has to do with more property, more people in exposed locations, not because there's more hurricanes, because there's more tornadoes, because there's more floods. In fact, we're in an era right now of fantastically benign extreme weather. We'll look back one day and say, boy, we were lucky around 2016.
Well, I think that the caterwauling that we're hearing from the climate activists, who I'm sure a lot of the people are well-intentioned. I mean, I consider myself a conservationist. I'm someone who really enjoys the outdoors. I do a lot of, kind of eco tourism, and I'm, a big outdoors person. So I think that's great, and that's fine. What I really object to is whenever anyone raises a question either about the integrity of some of the climate research, the motivations, the projections, they're immediately branded, and I'm glad you weren't, but they're immediately branded as anti-science. I mean, we've seen that in that professor of, that scientist in Massachusetts at MIT. I mean, he just was dragged through the mud, and that's just not right. I mean, maybe the science is still evolving here on this. Maybe there isn't an answer about how much exactly we're going to affect the global climate change or global temperatures by having massive reductions in carbon emissions. But you can't even say those words in some circles.
Yeah, I've experienced that firsthand. I've been, everyone from Paul Krugman to foreign policy to the president's science advisor has come after me for my views. And you're exactly right that the tenor of the issue has been to shout down people whose opinions diverge just a little bit from kind of the core activists in the environmental movement. And, one of the great things about science is that science is strong. If science can't stand up to questions, then, what's the point? So, yeah, I'm all for open questions, openness. But in the end, whatever action is taken on the environment and climate change isn't going to occur because everyone agrees on the science. It's because we put forward some policies that make sense to people across the political spectrum and can last over a long time. And that's, what we're seeing now is that one political party put forward some policies that aren't widely shared. And they're not going to survive when there's a regime change like we just saw.
So you did some of your first work in the space shuttle program. Is that right?
I did a cost-benefit evaluation of the space shuttle program a long time ago in the 1990s. Yeah.
Well, first of all, you're a math major. See, I'm always so amazed by math majors because I'm so bad at math. I mean, I'm just not a good math person. So you were a math major at UC Boulder, and then you went and got a PhD in political science. Then you ended up being environmental studies. Yep. Now you're writing about the corruption in elite sports. My goodness, this is a renaissance, man. Professor Pelkey, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your perspective.
Thanks, Laura. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll take a break on the Laura Ingraham Show. Giving the gift of food and water this Christmas. Simple. We take it all for granted, but not those most in need. So I want you to go to lifezet.com and click on that banner ad that says Give Life at the very top. That's the only gift I want for you to give to them.